I think Indiana has a great chance to be better in 2025 than they were in 2024. Now, maybe I've already lost you there with the plot, where I think that a team that had their best season in program history is going to somehow improve after that when they had a very easy schedule, when they had a winner at QB and had wonderful players on both sides of the ball, and many of whom, including Curtis Rourke, have left due to running out of eligibility, or like CJ West declaring for the NFL and getting drafted in the fourth round, which was pretty impressive. I thought CJ West was an amazing defensive tackle for Indiana last year. That Indiana defense was so damn good at the end of the year. And while the offense fell short in big games, it was impressive how just on time, quick, and efficient they were in really 11 of their 13 games, or at least 10 of their 13 games. That Michigan game was a game where the defense won. It was a close, needed win for Indiana, given their history against Michigan. So before we talk about why I think that is, I just want to ask you a few questions. Number one, when do staffs typically have their biggest impact in college football? Is it right when they arrive on campus? Or is it, 2-3 years in when they can make the players theirs, when they can really, put a print on them, when they can brand them, I guess is the best way I can say, when they can leave a mark on them and train them and mentor them. And also when you have a roster that is well outside the top 25 in terms of talent, well outside the top 40, or at least the top 30. I think Indiana's around the 50s in terms of roster rankings when you look at the roster they've assembled through past recruiting classes. Where are you going to typically go when you get high-level transfers in the portal? Are you going to go up, or are you going to go down? I think you know the answer to those questions. Typically, a staff is their biggest impact a few years down the line, year 2, year 3. And then when you have as talentless relative to recruiting rankings and team ceiling as Indiana does, when you have that talentless of a roster, using the portal the way they have is typically going to upgrade the roster, not downgrade it. It's a huge part of the reason why they were successful last year. They brought in players with a winning mentality, winning culture, and players who were proven. And some players who weren't as proven, but were talented and were maybe highly recruited out of high school, but just didn't pan out. And, oh well, they went to Indiana. That's more so the case with this transfer portal class entering 2025 than Indiana's 2024 class. But my point remains. Signetti inherited the epitome of nothing, the epitome of garbage, and brought it to 11-2, 8-1. They blew out all the teams with inferior, similar, or slightly better talent than they had. And the only teams they struggled against were top 15 talent rosters, and they're not even top 40. So I view the best coaching job in college football last year as Curt Cignetti's. And 11-2, 8-1, they returned 60% of their production. I think there's a great chance that they'll improve entering 2025. And before I get further into the weeds of that, I just ask that you would subscribe, hit the notification bell. Also, watch all the way through because it's going to be important for me to give you all the details and all my thoughts. And comment your thoughts below on Indiana. Do you think last year was a fluke? Or do you agree with me that they may actually improve? Or do you think that they'll regress, but last year wasn't a fluke at all and they'll win 9 games or maybe even 10 games or at least 8 games, maybe a strong 8 games, and they compete in their big games against Oregon and Penn State? Let me know, and make sure to check out the description for anything else you can do, whether it's subscribing and hitting the bell to my podcasts, just playlists for my content, or supporting the channel monetarily. All right, let's do this. Indiana is a really fascinating case study entering 2025 because they lose a good amount of key players, but they return a lot of key players, and they add in key portal additions. Indiana returns 61% of its 2024 production, and they have an 80.1 PFF grade with their best tackle in Carter Smith, who has 830 snaps coming back, 79.5 pass blocking grade, 75.7 run blocking grade. Indiana also didn't run the football all that well last year. They were good in power running, like just getting the needed 2-3 yards per carry. But in terms of explosive runs, and part of that was on the running backs, but also on the offensive line, which was thin last year, they just, yeah, they were not elite at running the ball. They were elite at stopping the run, though. They had the best run defense in college football, in my opinion, last year. They returned Elijah Sarratt, who had 53 receptions, 957 receiving yards, 8 touchdowns, averaged 18.1 yards per reception. Mikail Kamara comes back, someone who definitely would have been selected in the NFL draft had he declared. 15 tackles for loss, 10 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, 3 fumble recoveries, and a pass defended with an 86.4 PFF grade. Could be the best D-end in football this year. I look at Aiden Fisher, All-American linebacker, coming back with 118 tackles, 1.5 sacks, 6 TFLs, 4 passes defended, and then D'Angelo Pons returns at corner. Small, yes, but he makes up for it with heart, brains, and just absolute effort. 83.5 PFF grade at corner, 9 passes defended, 3 picks, and a pick 6 against Washington. And you have more starters than just them who return, or at least more players who contributed who come back. So I look at Omar Cooper Jr. at wide receiver. I think he's a nice player. I think he's a good player, could be a great player. I look at the 2 guards they bring back, Drew Evans and Bray Lynch, and also how they return Tyreek Tucker, who was in the defensive tackle rotation. Elijah Hardy was in the linebacker rotation. They bring back Amari Farrell. They have a lot of guys who were winning with the team last year, and some of whom were even with Signetti at James Madison, Pons and Sarratt. They bring a lot of them back, a lot of them. And that experience is valuable. And for those players to have an opportunity to continue to be developed and lead another group of Indiana football players is also valuable. They return a lot of veteran leadership, a lot of winners, and the only staff member they lost was Tino Sunseri. They retained every other member of their staff, even though many of them were enticed by higher level programs, big names, blue bloods, to leave. And Indiana was able to keep them. So they're bought in. The program's bought in. The staff's bought in. The players are bought in. And they bought players in the transfer portal too. I mean, think of Roman Hemby, who had 607 rushing yards last year, 6 touchdowns, did that behind the worst offensive line in college football, or one of the worst. Do you not think that other programs would have wanted him? Do you not think that? Because I think other programs wanted him, and Indiana just got him. What about Pat Coogan? 72.2 PFF grade, 813 snaps, a 79.1 pass blocking grade, and a 69 run blocking grade. Who wouldn't want Pat Coogan? There's a lot of teams who would have wanted Pat Coogan. I think Pat Coogan was even being entertained by Michigan to transfer there as center, and Indiana got him. Huge addition at center to replace Mike Caddick, who was a dog last year and unfortunately just didn't have any eligibility left. They bring in Fernando Mendoza, 16 touchdowns, 6 interceptions last year at QB, 3,004 passing yards, completed 68.7% of his throws, averaged 7.8 yards per attempt, which was the same as Carson Beck, and he had 2 rushing touchdowns and 105 rushing yards despite being sacked 40 times. Pretty crazy. I think Mendoza has more talent than Rourke. It's yet to be seen whether or not he'll be a better collegiate player, but I'm very high on Mendoza, especially in Mike Shanahan's system. And you look at Stephen Daly and Dominic Ratcliffe, some defensive linemen that Indiana got. They're also bringing in Jose Wheeler at defensive tackle. And then you also have to pay attention to Kellen Wyatt, Maryland's best defensive end, who Indiana plucked and poached out of the portal. Daly had an 81 PFF grade, 4 sacks, a forced fumble, 3 passes defended, 9 TFLs. Ratcliffe had 4 TFLs, 2 sacks, and 22 total tackles, and an 82.5 PFF grade. Just really, really impressive stuff that Indiana did in the portal, what they did last year overall, and what they're bringing back. I love what Indiana has entering 2025. Love it. And I know they lost Curtis Rourke. I know they lost CJ West. And I'm very well aware that they lost Caddick, some offensive linemen, and those are players that are going to be hard to replace. But I know that they have staff continuity, It's one of the better staffs in America, given what they did with Indiana last year. People will say it's lightning in a bottle, and I'll just respond with this convenient note. You say lightning in a bottle. That's what you say. You genuinely believe Indiana was lightning in a bottle. That's what you think of them. Well, let me read this off to you. How is, I know it was against the 55th toughest schedule in America, so it wasn't that tough, but given Indiana's talent and the fact that out of all the teams they played, 12-game regular season schedule, every team they played in Big Ten Conference outside of Northwestern and Purdue were more talented than they were by recruiting rankings, and have had, even Purdue and Northwestern have had better recent success than Indiana has. And yet, against those opponents, all of them in the regular season plus Notre Dame in the playoffs, Indiana scored 41.3 points per game, which was second in scoring offense last year. And that's factoring out games against FCS opponents, I do believe. Which they scored 77, and Western Illinois only scored 3. Indiana only allowed 15.6 points per game, which was 6th in scoring defense. It's absolutely bonkers what they were able to do even with that schedule. I mean, they were blowing out UCLA, who beat Nebraska, who did a pretty good job competing with Penn State on the road. They destroyed Nebraska in a way that Ohio State absolutely couldn't do, in a way that no one in the Big Ten would have done, outside of maybe Oregon. I don't even know if that. They beat Washington by double digits with a backup QB as Rourke was hurt. They scored 47 unanswered points against Michigan State on the road, and they lost to Ohio State, and Ohio State dominated them, but they held Ohio State to their second fewest total yards on the season, and they led them for a quarter and competed with them for a half. So I think what Indiana did last year was anything but a fluke when you look at how they beat their opponents and also how they lost their games. I mean, keep in mind, a lot of teams lost to Ohio State in a similar fashion to Indiana, if not worse. And it's the same thing with a lot of teams compared to Notre Dame that the Fighting Irish played. When I look at their schedule, it's an easier one relative to some of the tougher schedules in America yet again. It's much easier than Wisconsin's, for example. Indiana's to play Old Dominion week 1, Kennesaw State week 2, Indiana State week 3, Illinois week 4, Iowa week 5. They get a bye week 6, and then they play at Oregon week 7, host Michigan State week 8, host UCLA week 9. They play at Maryland and Penn State back-to-back in weeks 10 and 11. You then have Wisconsin at home week 12, a bye week 13, and then Purdue on the road in week 14. Their over-under win total preseason's 8.5. Their Big Ten odds are floating around plus 3,000, plus 4,000, really around that plus 3,500 mark. And their title odds, of course, are very small because a team that just has that low of a blue chip ratio has a infinitesimally smaller chance to win it all than even a team like Michigan, who, when you look at how Indiana and Michigan played last year, Indiana might be better than Michigan for the majority of the 2025 season, if not for the entire 2025 season. But those blue chip ratios and those higher ceiling players out of high school can especially matter when it gets to the postseason, for example. Indiana's only question mark, I think, is, do you believe in what the staff did last year or not? If you do, I think it's pretty clear that power rankings-wise, Indiana will get better. Now, since they play Oregon and Penn State on the road, they could, power rankings-wise, even be a whole touchdown better than they were last year and still lose those games and have a worse overall record. But that's the question. Do you believe in Signetti and Mike Shanahan and Bryant Haynes? Do you believe in them or do you not? If you don't, then, well, they're not going to be better than they were last year, if you're right. And if you do believe in them and you're right, well, I'm telling you they should be just as good, if not better, than they were last year, given what they return and given the fact that staffs usually have a big impact in year 2. I mean, think of Jim Knowles at Ohio State and the new defensive staff that Day hired along with them. Year 1 was a little bit rough. They had improvements, yes, compared to the prior year, but at the end of the year it fell apart. Year 2 in 2023 was when there was a massive improvement, and there was no drop-off throughout the year, even. Look at Nick Saban at Alabama. Gets there, has to clean up the mess. There are some improvements, but it's not all sunshines and rainbows. And then in year 2, well, they win the SEC West and are competing with Florida for a chance to go to the national championship game. And there are other countless examples too. So it's not always how it goes, and I could be wrong, but I love Mendoza at QB. I love Hemby and Kalon Black and Lee Beebe Jr. at running back. I think Sarratt and Cooper Jr. at wide receiver is a great duo. On the interior O-line with Bray Lynch and Pat Coogan and also Drew Evans, I love that offensive line play right there. And then on the D-line, I think that entire D-line is a strength. I think they have 4 quality DNs, and I think 3 to 4 quality D tackles, maybe more than that, because I think the staff's wonderful at development. I love Pons at corner. I love Elijah Hardy and Aiden Fisher at linebacker. And they have NFL talent at a lot of positions. It's hidden, but it's there. They have an elite staff, a wonderful culture. Safety, depending on how those portal additions pan out, could also be a strength. I think their biggest concern is Zen Michalski at right tackle. And Bob Bostad's a good enough O-line coach to where maybe he can make Michalski average and not bad like he was at Ohio State. Tight end could also be a weakness too, but I think talent-wise, Holden Stays is better than who he's replacing. I look at their portal class, and it's an 86.52 average rank per composite commit, which is not good, but at the same time, the staff has worked with diamonds in the rough before and unlocked them, and it's a better portal class than what they had last season. I think that Omar Cooper Jr. will break out. I think that Tyreek Tucker will break out at D-tackle. There's going to be a lot of players who emerge and are better than what they were last season. And I'm completely sold on Indiana. I don't know if you are, but I encourage you to buy stock into Indiana and Curt Cignetti. I think as long as they can keep him, I don't think Indiana's going anywhere long term. Will they win it all ever? I'm not going to answer that. I mean, probably not, unless they show us and bring in consistent top 25, top 20 recruiting classes, which Signetti's actually working on that right now. The recruiting is operating at a pretty good level for Indiana standards currently. Have 3 4-stars, and we'll probably get more for the 2026 recruiting class. Nonetheless, though, with a program like Indiana, you need to see it in order to believe it. But can they compete for maybe making an appearance in Indy? I think so. Can they compete for winning a playoff game at some point? I think so, given a field of 12 and soon to be 16 will include some weaker teams, especially relative to the top teams that Indiana can beat or even dominate, as not all 16 teams will have Ohio State level talent or Georgia, Alabama, even Notre Dame, Miami, Michigan level talent. Some of the participants will have much less than that. So I'm high on Indiana as a program. I'm even higher on them as a football team for 2025. I've said before, and Josh Pate actually clipped it for his bold prediction segment, I think Indiana's going to the playoff, and I think more likely than not, I believe they're going to win a game. So make sure before you leave, before we end off today, that you subscribe and like the video and comment how insane you think my view of Indiana football entering 2025 is down below.